I was painfully shy when I was a kid. My dad gave me a camera when I was 16 years old, and it was like Superman being given his cape. For the very first time, I could walk up to strangers and introduce myself, and it sort of gave me an excuse to interact with people. I'd always been sort of quite withdrawn as a child, but suddenly with the camera I could hang out with the jocks or the cheerleaders or the really nerdy kids, and it was like my passport to the whole world. So when it was time for me to go to college, I decided I wanted to be a photographer. And to my astonishment, my dad said, there's no way on earth you're going to be a photographer. You're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. If you're a photographer, you'll end up doing baby pictures and wedding photographs, and I want you to have a career. I'm not going to pay for you to go to college to sort of, take pictures of people in a little studio. And I said, Dad, I want to work for Time or National Geographic. And he said, you have a D- average, you never finish anything. Nobody knew what ADD was back then, but I had ADD, sort of extreme. He said, you never finish anything, and you have this total fantasy, you're just gonna go work for Time or National Geographic. The way the world works is you're going to work for a little tiny newspaper, you're gonna spend 40 years, maybe when you're 50 or 60, you might work up to like a regional publication. So I took my yearbook and a little box of prints to Time magazine when I was 21. And to my astonishment, I got hired on the spot. I shot up my first cover story when I was 23. When I was 26, I got hired by National Geographic. Of course, my father, this broke all the rules by which he had lived his life because it wasn't supposed to happen. And as I spent years, luckily wandering around the world and sort of serving as the world's eyes, I ran into other photographers. I was always about 10 years younger than everybody else. I was always the baby. I had hair down to here. I was this strange hippie kid. And all the other photographers, what amazed me is that even though I was working for Time and they might be working for Newsweek, when you were shooting, it was every man or woman for themselves. But when you weren't shooting, it was like your family. And you'd hang out with these people in bars and hotels. Every time there was a Pope visit or a typhoon or whatever the event was, the same more or less 100 men and women would descend on a country. And so we were sitting in a bar one night, and my friends were all bitching and moaning about how they hated their magazines, they hated their editors. And I said, guys, like, we're the luckiest people in the world. People are paying us $400 a day to rent Learjets and meet prime ministers and have our pictures on the cover. We're like the world's eyes, and like all you guys are doing is whining. And they said, kid, once you've been out here a while, you'll understand why. And I said, why? And they said, I realized listening to them is we all wanted our pictures to change the world. We didn't want to just illustrate some terrible situation. We wanted to think that when you all saw our photographs that you'd be so moved or disturbed or motivated by these pictures that you'd want to do something about it. And very often we felt that our pictures, when they were chosen, they always chose what we called the connect the dot pictures, the pictures that before we even went out, they had a mental picture of what the picture was supposed to be. They'd look through all the pictures you shot. If you showed them something they hadn't anticipated, for the most part, they didn't want to see it. They just wanted to illustrate their preconceived ideas. So I had this crazy idea sitting in a bar in Bangkok with my older, wiser friends, and I said, what if 100 of us all flew to a country from 30 countries? What if we did the Olympics of photography in a country like Australia, where I was living at the time? And I said, what if we could spread out all over the country and say, on your mark, get set, go. You've got 24 hours, one day, from midnight to midnight, to do a day in the life of Australia. So my older, wiser friends said, kid, what a great idea. You go organize it and we'll all come. And they all thought that would be the end of it, drunken late night conversation in a bar. So I'm a little obsessive. So I went out and I met with 35 publishers who laughed me out of their offices. They said, what a stupid idea. 100 of your friends having a party in some godforsaken country like Australia, who cares? And what would be in the book? And I said, well, we haven't shot the book yet. They said, Rick, no, it has to be the koala bears, the kangaroos, the opera house. I said, and then you end up with a book that looks like every other book anyone's ever done. And they said, well, you're talking about complete chaos. I said, no, I'm talking about we obviously want to come up with assignments and geographically and thematically spread the photographers out all over Australia, but once the photographers get out there, I hope they find things we didn't know about. Anyway, everybody said no to this idea. So I went to the Prime Minister of Australia, who I'd photographed before, and I said, I want to do a book about your country, will you give me the money? And he said, yeah, nice try, kid. He said, but I'll help you. And I said, no, don't be polite. He said, no, I'm going to help you, but I can't give you the money. He said, I'm going to set up meetings for you with the CEOs of Qantas, the CEO of Kodak Australia, the CEO of Hertz. And I said, why do I want to meet with all these business people? And he said, Rick, you're going to ask them for free hotel rooms and free film and free airline tickets. And I said, they're just going to give this to me for free. And he said, yes, because you're going to put their logo in the front of your book. I said, I can't do that. I'm a journalist. He said, Rick, it's like a PBS special. The following book is brought to you through the generosity of. And nobody had ever done photo books that were sponsored before. So we did a whole series of books, which I'll show you here. Basically, we had to self-publish the first book. It became the #1 book in Australia, became a sensation. We had photographers in 30 countries. And then I thought I was going to go back to being a photographer. I love being a photographer. But I started getting calls from the governor of Hawaii saying it's our anniversary of statehood. We got a call from American Express, would you come and do Japan? Gorbachev called us, his office called us from Russia saying, would you come and do Russia? So we started doing not only books, we started doing TV shows, and then when the web came along, we started doing websites and then apps. And so it was kind of a crazy ride. We then started doing the same thing. Instead of looking at countries on a day, we started looking at my dad, who worked for a drug company, who was now quite proud of me, as you can imagine, after his initial reluctance, said, why don't you do like a day in the life of medicine? And I said, Dad, like a book of people in hospital beds, who would want to look at that? And he said, no, he said, it's so inspiring how the human race is learning to heal itself, and it's so different from culture to culture and country to country. So we did a book called The Power to Heal. 1 out of every 3 doctors in America was given a copy of this book for free. And we started coming up with this model where we would do instead of a broad look at a country, we started doing deep dives on medicine, on the global water crisis, on the first year of the internet, and then most recently we've done a book on social justice, which is what I'm going to share with you today. I thought, because we've been turned down by every publisher in the world, that the media would be totally uninterested. I mean, it's their photographers doing a book, why would they care? It turns out the media loves doing stories about the media, if you haven't noticed. So not only, we thought we'd be lucky to just get into the magazines, but what was astonishing to us is that the magazines started putting us on the cover. So we were on the cover of Time, the cover of Newsweek, of Fortune. It was insane. And not only that, the TV media went equally crazy. With what's been going on in America in the last couple of years, it seems like the conversations about race and hatred and prejudice and anti-Semitism, and I thought, if you talk to a woman or somebody who's Jewish or black or Muslim or gay or Latino American or Native American, and you say, would you rather be in 1919 or 2019? When you ask the question that way, everybody says, well, definitely today, which by no means means we've solved all or even most of the problems. But I thought it would be really useful, instead of doing a book on a day, which is sort of the thing that I've been doing for a long time, or looking at a topic, what if you looked at the history of social justice through the eyes of photographers and writers and illustrators over the last 100 years, to remind ourselves how different the world is today than it was 100 years ago, and also to remind ourselves how fragile this progress is, how recent it is, and how fragile it is. 100 years ago, not only 100 years ago, women didn't have the rights to vote, which is really extraordinary. And if you got pregnant, you're immediately fired from your job. When my mom had me, she was not allowed to work for 2 years. It was considered to be an illness. Contraceptives were only available to married couples, which is kind of counterintuitive. And if you had an abortion, it was illegal. During the Martin Luther King's march in Selma, people from all different backgrounds joined him to march for equality. Many of you saw these pictures. The day after Trump was elected was one of the largest marches in American history, and that in 2016, 800 women ran for office in the United States, and last year 30,000 women ran for office, and many of them won, which is really encouraging. I mentioned also that with the Native Pipeline, more than 300 different Native American groups came together to protest the building of this pipeline. What was interesting about the story is it wasn't simply Native Americans protesting the desecration of sacred land, but they were also pointing out that the company that was installing the pipeline had a terrible track record of leaks, and that the towns that were south of this pipeline were going to suffer. It wasn't just Native Americans, it was people that lived south of the pipeline. And since the pipeline went through, there's been 6 leaks already in this pipeline. It's exactly what they were warning about at the time. Obviously, the impact of Hamilton, this amazing story of the founding of our country, with all the actors being played by people of all different racial backgrounds, also I thought was a wonderful statement. And if any of you haven't seen Hamilton, it's really a must-see. This is one of the stories that really shocked me the most. Until 1974 in the United States, we had a group of laws that were referred to as the ugly laws. And that if you were disabled or handicapped, that you could be arrested or fined if your handicap made other people uncomfortable. This is 1974. This is not that long ago. It's one of the reasons that people didn't see handicapped or people with disabilities for a very long time. And last year, 4.1 billion people watched the Paralympics. And also, a jockey, for example, has been featuring veterans who have orthotic legs in ads because it's now a sign of courage and patriotism. So you think of how much has changed in our country in just over such a short period of time. Defense of Marriage Act was really extraordinary. 123,000 people got married the year afterwards. This is one of my favorite pictures in the book. So here you have a Muslim American father with his daughter on his shoulders next to a Jewish American with his son on his shoulders protesting Trump's Muslim ban. So you got people coming together who you don't think of as being allies, all responding to something that feels incredibly unfair and unjust. I thought this quote from Kurt Vonnegut was very appropriate given what's happening right now in our country. It's that this idea of stoking hatred and trying to get people to fight against each other, it's like a narcotic. I don't know how many of you wake up every morning and turn on your phone and look at Twitter or Facebook and getting this sense of outrage. It's almost like a daily addiction, like, oh my God, look what they've done today. I don't know how many of you feel this way, but sometimes I don't want to watch what's happening in Washington. I just feel like I'm being played, whether it's the news media or the politicians, and I just want to look away. But have you ever gone driving late at night with a friend and you're in the passenger seat and they're driving and they say, just close your eyes and I'll wake you up when we get there? And you have this feeling if I close my eyes, they're going to crash. But if you don't close your eyes, you're still going to crash. And I don't want to give what's happening in Washington my attention, but I also feel like if I don't, that I'm letting them get away with it. It's funny, the picture of the grandmother here, I thought was a pretty powerful statement about how hatred is passed on from one generation to the next. And someone wrote to me and said, how dare you humanize the Ku Klux Klan? It's like so interesting how pictures are sort of like huge ink blot tests and everybody projects their own fantasy onto it. I thought it was a pretty clear picture of children are not born hating anyone else or caring what color someone is or what religion they are. This is all taught. This is all culturally imposed on children. During the Dakota protests, the local police in Dakota actually brought in police law enforcement from 20 other states, which is totally illegal. And they found emails afterwards saying, the media is not paying attention. If you want to come in and actually experiment on these protesters, they used water cannons, they used sound cannons, they used rubber bullets, they used attack dogs. These are peaceful protesters saying, you're encroaching on our land and our sacred territory. Look at the cop on the right. That's not somebody doing their job, that's somebody getting off on it. And we see this over and over again when the media is not paying attention. It's a frightening event, this idea of calling the media the enemy of the people. It's actually the enemy of despots. That's what the media is, and that's exactly the role that I think the media should be playing. In World War II, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the United States government decided anyone of Japanese descent should basically be taken away from their families, away from their farms, away from their business, and locked up in what were basically concentration camps for 2 years. The young men on the left are the same as the young men on the right. And what's extraordinary is despite the fact that what was done to them by their own country, these were American citizens, they are still unbelievably patriotic. George Takei from Star Trek actually was raised in a Japanese internment camp, and he wrote the essay that appears in the book. I have many more stories than I have time to share with you, but I want to share two more very quickly. Throughout the book, I'm a technology junkie. I love technology, and so when you do any book these days or any product, you want your book to stand out in the marketplace. And I would give this book away if I could for free. In fact, I'm right now fantasizing about trying to find a way of getting this book into every high school library in America, and we're talking to a number of foundations about it. So one of the things we did in the book is there are 63 pictures in the book, and when you point your phone at any one of these 63 pictures, it plays a TED Talk, a YouTube video, commercials. The fun thing about this project is I got to be a curator. I got to look through hundreds of thousands of pictures. We looked at 2,000 or 3,000 videos and choose the ones we thought were the most interesting. These are ads of how women were depicted in the 70s. This is only 50 years ago. Look how Madison Avenue decided that they could sell products to people. This is so unbelievably condescending and misogynistic. It's really extraordinary. We have graphics throughout the book that talk about how different the lives of women are today than they were only 100 years ago. So the whole book is actually designed to give people a sense of hope, to remind people how much we've accomplished, to realize that this progress is fragile. I don't think any of us would have believed 2 or 3 years ago that we could be slipping backwards. I think a lot of us felt the wind was at our back, things were going to keep getting better. It wasn't that we were by no means there, but it seemed like society and the world was moving in the right direction. I think a lot of us are concerned right now that there's some forces at play that are taking us backwards very quickly, much more quickly than I think any of us ever anticipated. Anyway, thank you all very much. Take care.